I'm Sasha Ann Simons, in today for Helene B. and Duty Hofer. It's all the rage right now in the media and discussion forums to talk about how to engage millennials in the workplace. The focus is often on capitalizing on their strengths and abilities, while at the same time embracing viewpoints and approaches that might be different from their coworkers who represent other generations. Millennials currently make up 25% of the U.S. population, and statistics show that by the year 2025, these young professionals will make up 75% of the workforce. But some leaders and young professionals themselves have spoken out, saying that the so-called struggle to engage millennials is the wrong way to look at it. Rather, we should look at attracting, motivating, and keeping them around. Here's my interview with Heidi Zimmermeyer, president of the Rochester Downtown Development Corporation, Anna Liss, Managing Director of Business Development at Greater Rochester Enterprise, Seth Eshelman, founder of Stash Inc., and Andre Primus, founder and director of RockShare. Now, before we begin, I want to just clarify for our viewers, millennials are currently aged 21 to 35, and the broader group, young professionals, that's more classified as 18 to 44. And right now, working in Monroe County, we've got about 250,000 of those people. Heidi, I want to start with you. Call them the millennial majority, if you will, in the workplace right now. Can you define for us who is the millennial, and what are some characteristics of that generation that make them unique?
I think we're seeing a very different worldview come out of this generation, and I see it in my own kids, and we're seeing it in the workforce. My particular organization has all millennials that work for it except for me. So I found it to impact the way the workforce, the actual workplace needs to be conducted. And I think we're seeing millennials demand a lot more out of their employers. There's a much stronger sense about locally produced things, about sourcing of products and foods. There's a sort of a meaning aspect to what you do in business, that it's got to have more than just profit motivation. And I think the lifestyle choices are different. This is a more urban generation, meaning people are preferring to live in urban settings. And it's changing the face of America's cities, and we're definitely seeing it here. In our particular community, we have a large number of organizations that have started up networking and kind of community-based organizations that are built by millennials that are now banding together and talking about strategy and policy and the direction of the community. It's really quite incredible.
Wow, that being said, I'd like you all to weigh in. What are some of the key components that attract the younger generation to any particular workplace? Like, what, if you could tell business professionals what they need to do to attract young professionals to, want to live and work and play here in Rochester, what would you suggest? Andre?
I think that if I were to choose three things, it would be flexibility, meaning, and opportunities for leadership. I think that, most of the people that I see, I can't speak for every millennial in the world, but most of the people that I know really are looking for, some sort of meaning in their work, and they want that meaning to extend into their professional lives or personal lives. And because of the melding between professional and personal, you need to have flexibility. You need to be able to, have some flexibility in hours, flexibility in job description, and I think that commensurate with all that is this opportunity for leadership. When people are looking for meaning, or when they have purpose-driven goals, then they're really going to want to be able to invest as a leader in what they're doing, as opposed to just a follower. So,
Anna?
Dovetailing on Andre's point about flexibility, if you look at companies out on the West Coast, in these big tech hubs that are really working hard to attract young talent, their benefits packages are all structured around basically flexibility. You have unlimited vacation, some companies give you the day off on your birthday, flexibility in hours. Look at, Google, Facebook, they have created workplace environments that are recreational in nature and full of amenities that would make somebody want to stay there all day long. Daycare, talking about family leave, encouraging young people with families to feel comfortable working for a company just because they know that they'll be taken care of when they have kids. So I think benefits is a key component.
So.
That's actually, it's a really challenging question. I would say, being one of the employers and entrepreneurs at the table who have a company with a team of people, it's tough. I mean, it's easy to talk about, all the things that you can bring in as a benefit or as a lifestyle option for your employees, but actually managing that team can be the most challenging part of the whole thing. And we're in a particular industry that we're manufacturing and service-based. A lot of the companies you see out there who bring on these different benefits or flexible hours or other things that allow them to give their employees space to be themselves. We've embraced that wholeheartedly. We create a very open environment for our employees, and we give them the opportunity to take leave when they need to, have vacations with their families, whatever they need to do to maintain their happiness, including working from home or working remotely. That's one thing that we try to embrace as a company. But as a manufacturer, your guy on the floor can't really take his machine home to go work.
Right.
So that, I think, is one of the more challenging aspects that we're constantly learning from our employees, how to bridge the gap between the service side and the manufacturing side.
Absolutely. It looks different, across the board.
Sure.
Now, locally, you're familiar with Rock City Coalition and their recent Vision 2025 report. So that group has partnered with local young professional groups, and that helped them compile, after doing some surveys with young professionals, it helped them compile a 74-page draft report on sort of what are all the things that young professionals want, the topic that everyone seems to be talking about. One of the things, when I spoke with the organization, they told me that one of the things they struggled with was making sure that they were inclusive and that they engaged the minority population. They felt that that group wasn't too particularly engaged. Did you have any suggestions, Andre, as to how to engage that population in particular?
Well, this is something that I've been thinking about lately, because it really is some of the same things. A lot of the when they talk about the millennial generation, a lot of the time we're talking about younger, wealthier white millennials, and they're the ones that have led the push into these new workspaces, and they're the ones that have had the social capital to demand things like more flexibility in hours. And I think that as they were the trailblazers in some of these businesses that have been harder for other groups to get into, I think we're starting to see that these are the same things. These are just basic things that people want. We're finding that people who might be in situations where, because of their economic or cultural situation, they got pregnant at a younger age, and now that's harder for them to move into the workforce because they have a child. But now with these more flexible hours, they're able to do things like that. And so I think that we're really being able to see that it's not, we need to make sure, when we're doing studies like this, that we are connecting to all groups. And there are some basic things you can do to that, really, getting engaged, having people who look like them be able to go and talk to them, things like that. But we're finding that a lot of their needs are very similar, and these are just basic human needs, and that everyone is really willing to work harder and work better when they are able to have meaning and have flexibility.
So no need for any segregation, basically, is what you're saying. Separating.
Yeah, there's no need for segregating things. You need to ask everyone, because there will be things that will pop up that are different between populations that people don't expect.
How important, Heidi, is location here when millennials are choosing workplaces? Is the downtown a desirable choice?
Downtowns are interesting because they're taking on a new role nationwide. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's shifted is geography of innovation, for example. And innovation companies are driven by millennial workforce. So all of that's kind of wrapped up together. And we're seeing kind of a movement across the country for innovation companies to choose center city or urban locations. And we're seeing that in the city of Rochester. It's not just downtown. There are other parts of the city where we're seeing that kind of begin to happen. And I think the other thing that needs to be said, kind of piggybacking on what Andre's talking about, is that this particular generation is the most diverse generation ever in this country. And if we're going to understand what a true 21st century community looks like, we've got to recognize what's driving change. And that means that there need to be seats at the table, whether it's in your workplace or whether it's developing community policy and public policy, direction for a community, all those kinds of things. And communication is complicated. You know, we found, and I'll just mention one incident where there was a guy who's actually a tech entrepreneur, African American, and he walked into one of our more typical high-tech incubators, and he turned around and walked out because he didn't feel comfortable. So we're going to have to find ways, as our own community is talking more and more about race, about structural racism, about how to create seats at the table for everybody, and that includes pathways to prosperity and all the language that we're all using. But this is a very real street-level thing, and so how we communicate, who we bring to the table, what questions are asked, who's doing the asking, all of these things are frankly far more important now. I mean, they've always been important, but they're going to be far more important as the racial and ethnic constitution of the U.S. population shifts.
Yeah. Speaking of shifts, another shift has happened is, millennials are bosses. And, people, the older generation at the workplace is now having to answer to, Gen X and Gen Y and millennials. Is that something that you're seeing? And how do you think the older generation is responding to that?
Oh, yeah. So my mom works for the University of Rochester Medical Center, and her boss is a millennial. And she actually enjoys it because it encourages her, she's a baby boomer, to think outside the box, be more creative. And I am seeing that companies that Greater Rochester Enterprise works with, we're seeing a lot of millennials, like Seth, for example, with staff that answers to them. And I think it's encouraging members of my generation to, we're stepping up to the plate and taking on more responsibility, and we're acting more like adults, So it's definitely influencing the workplace environment across Rochester's landscape in good ways and in ways that are challenging to baby boomers, older people that are having to change their schedules, change their behaviors based on the new energy in the workplace. And at GRE even, we have, I think, 5 generations on our team. So we're working with a career coach that's helping us to kind of meet one another where we're comfortable, and we're all finding ways to work with each other in ways that are nimble and giving deference to one another. So.
Are community connections and volunteering, are those important too? How do those kind of rank on the priority list?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a core value that Stash has as part of a benefit corporation, and that larger community that we are joined by many companies around the world, Patagonia, Ben & Jerry's, obviously, to name a few. That's actually a driving force that we encourage our employees to take time off if they want to go volunteer. Well, we'll pay you to go volunteer, go engage with your community, and whatever interests them as a person, we want to make sure that we can encourage that.
That's interesting. So the message here, to bosses and to companies then is, to understand that the workplace looks different. Things are changing, and you have to be able to adapt. Is that basically what we're saying here?
Yep.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me. This is very important, this discussion. I actually look forward to hoping to have you guys back in the future. Sure. Heidi Zimmermeyer, Andre Primus, Anna Liss, and Seth Eshelman. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And you can take a look at the full Vision 25 report as mentioned online. Just go to rockcitycoalition.org/vision-2025.